The Sahara covers 8 million square kilometres, nearly 15 times the size of France. It is in this environment, covering parts of Algeria, Niger, Mauritania and Burkina Faso, that the Tuareg live. The Tuareg. When the Arabs arrived in Africa, they called them Molathemim, the veiled, or Ahelel Litham, people of the veil. Kel Tamashek, those who speak Tamashek. This is how they call themselves. Once their wealth originated from camel caravans that crossed the Sahara, bringing goods as far as Italy and Turkey. Many things have been said about this semi-nomadic people, once called the sons of the desert, who have lived for so many years in the harsh environment of the Sahel region. Theirs is a culture that thrives on cultural exchange, images and a code of modesty in their daily behaviour. Language, poetry, clothes, objects, their whole way of life is imbued with elegance and modesty, the result of self-control and a lifestyle born of austerity. Since medieval times, Arab-speaking travellers have constructed the avatar of the veiled nomad of the Sahara, ancestor of today's Tuareg, a strange and exotic figure. Such writers are all the more indignant about the liberal attitudes of the women and the matrilinear nature of filiation and the succession, in that these social roles exist within an acknowledgement of Islam. Amongst the Tuareg, the connection between the genders are relationships that are mutually effective, different, yet equivalent. In this film, you see the Sahel region of Burkina Faso, bordering Mali and Niger. Since the fight again increased in January of 2012, now more than 80,000 refugees, the majority of them Tuareg nomads, fled and now live in refugee camps under the authority of the Burkina Faso government and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. This film documents the first week since the arrival of refugees in the Sahel region of Burkina Faso. The Tuareg were one of my childhood memories. It evoked my fantasy as a sulky and bored teenager growing up in rainy northern Germany. I subsequently chose to study Oriental languages and graduated and became a so-called humanitarian worker, a kind of idealistic nomad in itself. Never would I have imagined that one day I would be called in order to assist refugees who are Tuareg. In order to provide assistance to refugees, it is often important to first register them. We hired around 50 young people, some of them of Tuareg or Peul background, and secured generators, cars and other equipment necessary for this registration effort. It took place during the day, and during the night we slept under the open sky of the Sahel region. This was the place we drove to after a long day of registration carried out in a nearby refugee camp. We shared many good moments together, and the long nights under the stars were often accompanied by glasses of mint tea, storytelling and laughter. We remember one day waking to our fellow travellers praying one by one. It was maybe around 4 o'clock, and although none of us consider him or herself very spiritual or religious for that matter, the silence and equanimity of these desert prayers moved us beyond our imagination. We remembered that all prophets were said to have originated from the desert or from their reclusion to deserted areas, such as Jesus, Muhammad, and also Buddha. A day working in the refugee camp usually starts around 5 a.m. and goes on until 4. Nevertheless, we had to set off at 6 a.m. quite often and drive back because the sun would set, and at 10 we were back in Dori. For the Tuareg, being photographed or filmed by us did not constitute a problem as such. This is also a sign of their openness to modern communication, science and art, not to be found amongst the more traditional Muslim societies. The Tuareg adhere to Sufism, the Islamic mysticism, and have enemies, therefore, amongst the more traditional Muslim circles. Arriving at refugee sites wherever we went, we were surrounded by men, women and children speaking both French and Tamashek. We sat in tents and went into lengthy debate about what to do. Refugees and animals were short of water, food, shelter and medical care. The poor condition of the makeshift tents, often erected within few hours, remained a constant problem. What impressed us the most was the openness which the Tuareg leaders were asking us for, without ever demanding anything, rather untypical for many refugees we had seen before, thanking us and trying to find solutions along with us under very difficult circumstances. The lines of who was who became blurred, and we all felt too well that the harsh environment would threaten us all, yet some more than others. We had to stand together as one. And what remained also very vivid in our memories were the weather-beaten faces of the Tuareg and their hand gestures, underlying or emphasizing what they were saying. Walking through the desert, we often didn't know where we were going, but we remembered that one of our main objectives was the search for water. The colourful clothes of the Bella, former enslaved black African, made a welcome shock of colour in the midst of the monotony of the desertic horizon. We were mostly in contact with the men who formed associations to deal with issues like shelter, water and sanitation. Unlike other Muslim societies, our female colleagues never faced any problems communicating with refugee leaders. There are numerous explanations why men wear a veil or a turban called tagamouche in the Tamashek language. Yet the most obvious one is to protect the face, eyes and ears against the red desert sand, and also maybe to ward off diseases and bad spirits, as it is traditionally believed. This is one of the meetings where we discussed what could be done in order to provide water, sanitation and medical care for the thousands of refugees.
Donc il n'est plus à Ferelio. Il n'est plus à Ferelio, il n'est plus dans les réfugiés de Ferelio.
Here you see the UNHCR team together with the Burkina Faso authorities. And here you see a refugee leader in his traditional clothes, the tagalmush or shesh. Around his neck he wears an amulet containing sacred objects or verses from the Quran. The traditional indigo clothes of the Tuareg have caused visitors of the colonial era to call them the blue people. Among the Tuareg, it is only the men who cover their faces, whereas the women do not. In the area where refugees are accommodated, they had to share the space and resources with an indigenous population. Now, the new arrivals and the old nomads had to share water, firewood, and grazing land. We were also surprised by the generosity of the Burkina Faso nomadic population until we learnt that they were often of the same origin as the Tuareg. This is where we transported a number of refugees who had been stuck in the desert for the refugee camp. We were the only ones who were there first. Later on, Doctors Without Borders and other NGOs came, but it was still not enough, and we often regret that we didn't do enough. The children were never scared of us. On the contrary, they came and played and smiled. We learnt that women in Tuareg society play a very important role. Much has been said about them: matrilineal traditions, preservers of the tradition, owners of the tent. Women choose the men and can divorce, and if this happens, they may remarry easily and do not lose custody of their children. Divorces are frequent in Tuareg society, and they are not the reason for grievances. The issues of love and passion are an integral part of the nomadic tradition. Very often the refugee leaders know better than us what to do. They had sometimes held important positions in Mali. Some of them had been mayors, others parliamentarians, others community leaders. We could only find a solution to the humanitarian problems if we were to include the refugee leaders. And here you see colleagues prior to the registration. The registration is generally an exercise where you can tell your name, the size of your family, and where you receive a registration card. This was to become the medical clinic at a later stage. 2.5 weeks after our arrival, the first staff of Doctors Without Borders arrived. These were orphan children living with their grandmother. You can see how much she suffered by looking at her face, but when we saw her the second time, she smiled at us. We believe, in the end, that the important thing for these people was to be together and to be represented by leaders who did not abuse their power but really took the welfare of their people into consideration. Like other nomads, the Tuaregs were marginalised and impoverished. After arbitrary new boundaries were established by the new national states. Following the end of the colonial era, the nation-states had decided to draw frontiers that didn't exist before. Like other nomadic groups, this situation worsened since 9/11. The international community that was previously fascinated by the sons of the desert, as they used to be called, and by their way of life has now become somewhat suspicious of them. The times where the Tuareg were the exotic hosts of the Sahara through which participants of the Paris-Dakar rally drove have now become replaced by negative headlines of revolt and rebellion, terrorism, Islamic extremism and drug smuggling. The recent history of the Tuareg is marked by the struggle for a free state that is the territory of northern Mali, where more than 600,000 Tuareg have lived for centuries. Since the early 1990s, cohabitation with the Malian authorities has become extremely difficult. Poverty and underdevelopment cause frustrations, and many young, unemployed Tuareg went to Libya, their ancestral homeland. Those back home lived of remittances and saw natural resources such as phosphate, petrol and uranium being traded off by African governments and foreign companies. When Gaddafi fell, many emptied the weapon depots and came back to northern Mali, where they formed the MNLA, Mouvement National pour la Libération du Azawad. On the 6th of April 2012, the MNLA proclaimed Azawad as the newest state. Yet soon, Islamist fighters, often backed by Islamist countries, took over. Tens of thousands of refugees were forced into exile. Already, northern Mali has sunk into chaos. Islamists and Tuareg fighters are embraced in fierce battle. Hundreds of civilians massacred, World Heritage sites in Timbuktu destroyed by Salafists. We are now back in Europe. There are now other colleagues who have replaced us. And even though we are back, we won't forget the people, we won't forget the pictures, nor the environment. Neither shall we forget the colourful clothes, the greetings, the direct eye contact, the people talking with their hands, laughing, sharing a smile, bringing us tea, although they don't have anything for themselves. Yet they all have to live like their forefathers lived, who were able to go back to their original way of life, who hadn't forgotten the tools to survive with a minimum. In an era of globalization, nomadic people such as the Tuareg bestow cultural wealth to our planet, and it is therefore our duty to help this ancient culture to survive so that the desert never becomes empty and that the blue people can have a future in the desert and on the land they love and honor.